Hey everyone, I'm Hashem, you're watching Pushing Film, and if you're familiar with Cinestill 800T, you know that it's a good film for both night photography and artificial light photography because it's tungsten balanced. And as you can see in some of these examples here, it does work quite well for that, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is some alternatives to shooting Cinestill 800T, because not only has the price gotten quite high lately, but also it seems to be, at least at the time of making this video, that stock is hard to come by. As an example, here in Australia, it costs about 25 Australian dollars a roll if you can get a good price on it, but because of the shortages, there are some places that price gouge a little bit and charge upwards of 35 Australian dollars a roll, which in my eyes is a little bit too much for a single 35mm roll of film, especially given some of the characteristics I'm going to talk about soon. One of those characteristics is the halation that you get with this film. Because it's basically Kodak's Vision3 motion picture stock without the remjet layer, this means that a lot of the shots will result in this halation in the bright highlights of your images. I know that some people don't mind the halation and in fact even like it, but for me, I'm not really the biggest fan of this halation. So given that factor and some of the price and shortage issues, let's talk about some alternatives. So all of these example shots you're seeing from me are quite old. I haven't shot Cinestill since around 2018. And one of the main reasons is that since then, it's become a lot easier to find alternatives, including shooting the original Kodak Vision3 motion picture stock. It's become easier to find ready-to-shoot 35mm canisters of this and even the other motion picture stocks, and therefore that's what I've been doing ever since when I want to shoot this type of film. Now you have to keep in mind, however, when you shoot the original motion picture stock, it still has what's called the remjet layer on it. This means you can't drop the film off at a regular C41 lab, and that means you ideally want to develop it yourself at home in either C41 chemicals or the intended ECN-2 chemistry. One of the other exciting alternatives that's been popping up lately is smaller, more independent labs that actually develop the film in ECN-2 chemistry, and these labs also often supply it. You might have seen me talk about this in a lot of my previous videos, including the one about medium format cinema film, where I spoke a lot about a place here in Melbourne called B2 Darkroom. So the difference in price, at least here in Australia, between buying the original Cinestill 800T stock and let's say a roll of 35mm Kodak Vision3 500T stock is quite noticeable. So rather than that price of about 25 to 30 Australian dollars, you can get a roll of 500T for about 12 to 15 dollars quite easily online. And one of the main added benefits, at least for me, when shooting this original stock, which still has the remjet layer on, is that you don't get any of those halations. So personally, whenever I've shot any of the Vision3 films at home, I've developed it myself in Unicolor C41 chemistry, and I've been really happy with the results. I've done a couple of videos showing some of the results, such as this one here where I went around shooting in the city at night, and it has plenty of examples if you want to check out more of that. But what if you're someone who doesn't want to develop their own color film at home, which is completely understandable? That's where those third-party options come in, like B2 Darkroom and Silberzals 35. But before going on any further, let's jump into Lightroom and have a look at some examples, including both Cinestill and the original Kodak Vision motion picture stock. Alright, so starting off, what you're seeing here is a bunch of photos taken on Cinestill 800T, mainly 35mm, but I've also thrown in a few medium format shots as well. And you might notice in some of the examples here that red halation, which looks like little red blobs on the highlights of certain photos. But overall, Cinestill 800T does look quite nice. It is quite a contrasty result, I find, most of the time I've shot it. Alright, so going back to the grid, let's take a look at this photo here, which was actually shot on the original Kodak Vision500T stock. So just putting them side by side here, you can see that distinct difference between having the halation and not having it. And also, at least in these two examples, a slightly smoother, flatter look in the Vision500T stock. And in the last comparison here, you can see that sort of trend again with the 500T on the left and the Cinestill on the right. Alright, so coming back to the grid now, let's take a look at some of the B2 Darkroom 35mm Kodak Vision3 500T stock, which is developed in ECN-2 chemistry by them and scanned on the Noritsu machine. So once again, you can see here in survey view that these have a slightly flatter look with a bit less contrast compared to Cinestill 800T, and again, none of that halation happening in the bright point highlights, as you can see, especially in these shots at the carnival taken here. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about the difference between the 500T film developed in C41 chemistry at home by myself and the same film developed in ECN-2 by either Silberzals 35 or B2 Darkroom. Now, because these shots aren't of the same scenes, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but I just want to give you a general sense of some of the difference, if any, that you might notice between processing in C41, and in ECN-2. Alright, so looking at two nighttime photos here, both taken on tripods, the left one being ECN-2, the right one being C41. There is no major difference in the general look of these images. Again, they're not of the same scene, but one general trend I've noticed is that the ECN-2 processed images appear to look a bit darker. This can especially be apparent in the shadows, as you can see in this image here. They were both accurately metered, but I always tend to find that the C41 developed negatives are a little bit denser and therefore containing a little bit more information, which is useful when it comes to scanning. Alright, now moving away from all these examples in Lightroom, I don't want to waste too much of your time and just sort of give you the long story short. There's not going to be a huge difference between the C41 processed and ECN-2 processed Vision 3 film. This may just be my opinion, but I've established it through shooting many rolls of both daylight balanced and tungsten balanced Vision 3 film, and having the same films processed in ECN-2 by places like B2 Darkroom and Silberzals, and a lot more difference will lie in the way that the film is scanned, the way that it's processed even, and especially the way you expose the film. This film tends to like a lot of light. It's best overexposed, so even though it's a 500 speed, you can get better results by exposing it at closer to 200 or 400, and the same thing applies to even Cinestill 800T. So without nitpicking too much, whichever one of these three options you decide to shoot, I'm sure you'll get results that you're perfectly happy with. They're going to give you that unique motion picture film stock look, as long as you expose the film well and it's processed properly and scanned well, which is going to give you probably the most difference in terms of color and output. I don't think it's worth diving into the minute differences between ECN-2 processed, C41, and so on. Obviously with Cinestill, there is that halation factor, but besides that, they're all actually the same film stock. So with the examples I showed you, they were all 35mm, but if we look at some of these shots here, these are some 120 examples of Cinestill 800T, and you'll see more of a difference with a jump in format like that. And there are also similar options in 120 for shooting the original motion picture stock. I made a whole video about that you can check out here called Medium Format Cinema Film, where I reviewed some of B2's options for shooting this film stock in 120. So check that out if you want more examples of 120 cinema film. So in summary, whichever way you go, tungsten balanced cinema film offers an undeniably unique look when it comes to night photography and artificial light photography. And that's not to say that regular old consumer C41 film can't look great shot at night or in artificial light situations as well. As you can see in this night shot taken on Portra, and this other night shot with artificial light taken on good old Kodak Gold 200. But if you are wanting to dabble with some of this stuff, in my opinion, it comes down to two main variables, which are convenience and price. And on one end of the scale, you have the most expensive option in terms of price being Cinestill, but also the most convenient. On the other end of the scale, you have the option to buy your own Vision 3 motion picture film and develop it yourself, which is going to be the cheapest, but also the least convenient, because it is quite time consuming to develop your own color film, remove the remjet layer, and probably have to scan it yourself. And lying somewhere in the middle is to use some of those services I mentioned to supply you with the actual motion picture stock and develop and scan it for you. Generally speaking, this is going to be a little bit cheaper than buying and processing Cinestill, and it's going to give you the results of the original motion picture stock without those halations if they're not for you either. This service is offered here in Melbourne at least by places like B2 Darkroom. There is also Silberzals 35 based in Germany, which I already mentioned. And another one I've heard of is called Quiet We're Dreaming, or QWD, and I'm sure there's probably others, and that more will probably pop up moving forward. Lastly, you always have the option to shoot digital and try and emulate the look of tungsten balanced Vision 3 film using editing or presets. I have messed around a little bit trying to match a digital shot of the same scene that you can see here to a shot taken on Cinestill 800T. And although you can get it pretty close, obviously it's not going to perfectly match the look of Cinestill. If you are wanting to go down that path, what I would advise you to check out are some of the presets for Cinestill. The best I've seen out there are by Jamie Windsor, which you can check out on YouTube. He has an amazing channel and he's made a great video about his presets for Cinestill 800T. I don't have any affiliation with Jamie. I haven't actually bought the preset pack myself because I don't really see myself using them to emulate my digital shots. but I have heard great things, and if you watch this video, which I'll leave a card for, he runs through using the presets with a lot of different example shots in a great video he's put together. And from what I can see in these videos, the presets work amazingly well, and he even has some options to emulate the halation if you actually want that in the shots too. So I hope this video highlights some of the alternatives to shooting Cinestill 800T, whether it's because you can't get your hands on it, there's no stock, or you find that it's too expensive. I do encourage you to experiment with some of the options like shooting the original motion picture stock and developing it yourself if you're keen on that, trying out some of the services like B2 Darkroom, or even maybe messing around with some of those presets if you just want to stick to digital. I'll put some links in the description to some of the ECN-2 labs I mentioned, to some of the other videos I've made on the channel in regards to this subject, and to Jamie Windsor's video I mentioned about those 800T presets. I hope you found this interesting and somewhat helpful. Thanks for watching another episode of Pushing Film, and I'll see you on the next one.